Rockingham County government presents You've Got Grit. You've Got Grit. Dr. Herman G. Platt of Reidsville, North Carolina. You've got grit. Grit is that extra something that separates the most successful people from the rest. It's the passion, the perseverance, the stamina that we must channel in order to stick with our dreams until they become a reality. This is a quote by Travis Bradbury. You've got grit. Herman Platt of Reidsville, North Carolina. We know him as a distinguished person with a background in the military, as a minister, as a farmer, as a philanthropist who loves to give away all of the harvest and the things that he grows. And this is why we wanted to talk to Herman Platt. You were born and raised in Greensboro, graduated from the historic Dudley High School, and immediately joined the military. What did you learn being in the U.S. Air Force?
Well, being in the Air Force, first of all, I went to the Air Force because I realized I had missed that opportunity to go to college. Didn't have the funds, parents didn't have it. So I knew that going into the Air Force, there was a possibility of setting aside a education. So that's why I basically went into the Air Force.
And did you learn any special lessons while in the Air Force?
Well, it was a good experience in education because one of the things that I did was, as a material facility specialist, handling warehousing and knowing how to deal with transportation in terms of delivery, because I was responsible to not only get into the warehouse but also get into receiving, getting to handling items that were sent to the warehouse, put in stock, from stock, transported around the base through a pickup and delivery to customers who signed for them. And I related it on a trip coming into Greensboro one time because I went to Sears warehouse. And in fact, that particular trip helped me to pass one of my Air Force tests because it guaranteed me the insight of what civilians did, and I saw what the military did, and it clicked. I went in and studied the book, and I got promoted.
Relatable skills. Yes. Tell us about your transition from the U.S. Air Force to the United States Navy.
Well, one of the things that I had always desired is starting ministry in 1973. I desired to become a chaplain. I thought all I needed to do was just apply for it, and then I would get it. And then later they came back and said, no, you've got to have a bachelor's degree, you have to go to seminary, and then you have to get a master's of divinity. So that meant for me, all right, now I'm going to have to do what I came toward the military, trying to set that thing aside to wait for later. So I went on with it and found myself later on getting that education, later on going to Fort Worth, and from that particular base went to Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and from there transitioned into the Navy as a chaplain.
Now the Navy ended up having you and your wife, the former Regina Warren, who has roots in Stokesdale. You all became real globetrotters. What are some of the places you lived, and how did this global traveling shape Herman Platt?
Well, as I say, my leaving Greensboro, North Carolina was my first airline trip, and that took me to San Antonio, Texas, where the Air Force made me an airman, and I enjoyed it. It was a little challenging because I also met people from the different parts of the United States and began to get some geographical indications as to the differences in culture, what we did as a people of color and other people. And so I began to see some things. And what that did, after leaving there, I went into Colorado, Denver, Colorado, Rocky Mountain High. and learned some things about the difference in air and breathing. And going through school, I also learned that sometimes when you don't do your homework, you fail. And I was almost at a point of failure, and I had to study a little harder. And I found myself in a situation where I really wanted to be in the profession, so I had to study a little harder. And thank God I made it and got out of there. Because, you know, when you're young, you're trying to test the waters and have some experiences. But I didn't want to stay in Colorado, so I left there. Sent me to my first base, which was in Illinois, Rantoul, Illinois. First time on a train, coming out of Chicago, Waukegan, Illinois, in that area, and I went up on a train, and that was my first assignment, and I stayed there. And during that particular assignment is when I got married, and 1973, and I went in and stayed in an apartment, started out in an apartment with two other guys, and then after I got married, I slept on the sofa in that apartment because I couldn't afford to do anything else. Later on, sent Sister Regina back home because I was on my way to Okinawa, Japan. I went to Okinawa, Japan, and stayed there for over 18 months, and then later on, out of that assignment, I sent for her. She came in and stayed there for a while, and then came back to the United States and began to New Mexico, and that's where I met a number of the Church of God in Christ people. But my real adventure and blessing was when I first went to Okinawa. That's where I really became acquainted and joined in through the Church of God in Christ. I was aware of it in Greensboro at Wells Memorial Church of God in Christ. Bishop Wells was the bishop and pastor. But as a young boy, I was in and out, in and out, in and out. Grew up in the United Holiness Church, in and out of Wells Memorial, trying to enjoy the young people, seeing things, into music, and so forth and so on. And then when I got to Okinawa, it introduced me to the polity. It introduced me to the ministry. It introduced me to what I was supposed to be and what I was going to be doing later on. In that same time, still had a desire, but didn't have the background. Found out that I needed it. So right there at Kadena, I began to go to school. Los Angeles Community College. I went from there to several other schools that were in with the community system of colleges. And later on, I went to Morgan State University and, extension, and graduated, and found myself, all right, now I got the bachelor's. Now I need to go from there. Went to the University of Oklahoma because I picked that up when I went after coming back to the United States and being assigned to Korea. I was in Seoul, in that Seoul area, Osan. I dealt with the Air Force there. And I was a teacher at that time. I had changed from being in transportation and in supply over to being involved with the teaching of Air Force personnel who were getting ready to become staff sergeants and sergeants, and teaching them how to understand leadership and what leadership was all about. Leaving there, I came back to the United States and went back into the area of my training, which you could go in and out as long as you didn't stay out so long, and found that it helped me to take that break. And so later on, after coming back, I ended up back in Okinawa, Japan again. And so I did two long tours in Japan. Finally getting back to the United States, went into, as I said, Texas, left Texas, and then after finishing all of those assignments out of Texas, Okinawa, New Mexico, and traveling through some different places in the world, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and just enjoying life, and finally coming to a point where I transferred to the Navy. I went up to Newport, Rhode Island in July. 4th of July, I had to be report to chaplain school. So I went on in and reported, and then found myself in a situation where it was required that you had to swim in order to pass the test. You had to pass the test in order to go into the chaplain's school. Because I had prior military service, I had already been in the military for 16 years. So I was required, though, to pass this swim test. So my second day there, and they said, all right, we're going to the pool. Everybody went to the pool. We had priests as old as 60, 70 some years old in there, and everybody, you know, that was the Navy's requirement. So we all got there. I stood there and looked at that pool, and I watched these people jumping in, and I said to myself, I don't know if you want to jump in that pool, because prior to that in my life, I'd had a water experience, and I almost drowned, and thank God took me and jumped in and pulled me out. And so I stood there and looked at that water and finally said, nah, I'm not going to do this. And I said, well, I think your Navy career is over. You won't become the chaplain that you wanted to be. But the man told me, said, look, since you can't do this, every morning at 5, you're going to have to come to the pool and you have to learn how to swim. I said, okay, I can do that. So I went to the gym thinking if you build muscles, you could handle the water. And I found out the more muscles I built, the more I sank. So I did finally learn how to do what I needed to do and got through, and finally graduated from the chaplain school. My first assignment, San Diego, California. And went to San Diego, 32nd Street, and then I was assigned from there to the USS Constellation, which was the Admiral's platform. I was with the Admiral staff and traveling from there to different parts of the world. And that's how I ended up in Desert Shield, Desert Storm, ended up in Bahrain, Abu Dhabi, Jebel Ali, Dubai, Arab Emirates, all of those different places over there, traveling, flying on helos, going from ship to ship, traveling with the Admiral and staff. And, you know, it was a good time. It was a good time. And then I saw a lot of things, some things that even to this day has come back, but that was it. Family was at home at the time, but in the United States, but right there from California was a real experience. Then after we finished there, I put in for an assignment to get an extra degree in the military so that I could serve in hospitals. We used to have what they called a cradle, which was a facility where you could take troubled Navy persons aside and do some spiritual things with them. And after I went through a number of them, I didn't want to do all of that. And so I finally had to go to a naval hospital. So I went into Bethesda's Naval Hospital. I was at Norfolk. And out of Bethesda Naval Hospital, I got a special assignment to go to Arlington. And from there is where I had my, what they call the planter experience. And that is those who had died in the military from the naval services and the Department of the Navy. It was my job to see their burials. And so that was between 6, 7, 8 burials a day, except for Saturdays and Sundays. So that was what I did. And out of that, and those experiences, finally got a call to come to pastor a church in Greensboro, North Carolina, the Wells Memorial Church of God in Christ.
Along with those assignments, you participated in a major CBS TV series. Share with us about West Wing.
I almost didn't go to West Wing because I had replaced one of the chaplains at Arlington, and I enjoyed Arlington. You know, people say, especially in our cultural experience of Church of God in Christ, funerals take 3 and 4 hours. I mean, you know, and I used to tell folks, you don't have to take that long for a funeral. I can do a funeral in 15 minutes and do the whole thing.
Arlington National Cemetery.
Arlington National Cemetery.
Okay.
We had to. You don't have time. Yes, I did funerals in chapels. From the chapel, I went following the horses, and we would go to the gravesite, put them in the gravesite, and then I'm in a car on my way back to the office. I've got to change paperwork and get to the next family, interview that family, and start it all back over again. So I kept a window between 30 to 45 minutes in terms of making sure I could do the funerals. And then everything wasn't a full funeral. We had cremations, we had ashes. We did a number of things, but you could do that. And so I found myself through all of this, and it was good. It was good. But one day they came to me and said, there is a story that they want to put on television on the series West Wing, and it involves a chaplain. You've got to, you're going to have to do the last rites. I said, what do you mean last rites? He said, well, you're going to have to be the chaplain. And I told him, I said, man, I got funerals to do. I ain't got time to be doing those. I said, but then again, are they going to pay me? No, you can't get paid. So we went through that whole thing. I said, that's all right. I don't want to do that. Let somebody else do it. And I got a phone call from over at the Pentagon in the office of the senior chaplain. And I was told, you were selected to be at Arlington, and you are now being selected to be in this story, West Wing. You can refuse it, or you can do it. And the possibility is that's one of the points on your fitness reports. Well, I knew what that meant. And I told them, reluctantly, I'll do it. And it was a good experience. I mean, after seeing how they do different things in terms of recording, I mean, we recorded for, I think it was over the weekend. Now, you know, I came back and said, oh, no, definitely we can't do it. I'll work with y'all, but Sunday is church day, and I realized, you know, that you have to do what you have to do. And so we recorded and recorded and recorded. You go from one shot, you go from one segment, you go from one movement to the next movement, and, you know, my little spot is not long, but I was there, and I appreciated the opportunity to be in West Wing. And so I made a little bit of history. Every once in a while somebody will see that and all of a sudden get to the end and say, wait a minute, I think I know that person, and run it back. And that's me standing with the Marines, taking care of a veteran who was found on the street, passed away, and didn't have family. And the vice president wanted to do something. And so they got involved, and that's how Arlington got involved. And we did that. So I made my debut in the movies.
So from Arlington National Cemetery and CBS hit West Wing to Rockingham County, North Carolina.
How did I end up in Rockingham County?
Yes.
My son used to work for Johnson Landscaping and Cutting, and he saw an advertisement that there was a house for sale. I was living in Greensboro in a rental, of course, family, and I said I'd like to have something out. I didn't want something in the city. So I went on one of our conferences and came back. He said, Daddy, I found a house that I think you might like, and it's got some land on it. I said, okay, let's take a ride. So that evening we took a ride, and I went to the house that I'm presently in now, and I saw it. When I walked up on it, I looked at the land. I didn't look at the house. I wasn't concerned about the house, so to speak. I looked at the land and I said, okay, this is what I want. I can have me a garden. I can have me a garden. So I said, all right. I came back, that was in the evening. I didn't have enough light. I wanted to see the rest of it, so I came back the next day and got a chance to go in the house. I walked in the house, walked through the house, walked to the back, the French doors in the back, and opened it up and stood on the banner and looked across, and I said, this is it. I told Sister Regina and where it was, and I heard this. I heard her telling my sons, don't tell your daddy. Please don't tell your daddy. Please don't tell him. Well, he did tell me, and so she was scared because it was country and it was dark, and we've worked it out. We've worked it out. It's been a thrill. I've enjoyed farming. I've enjoyed running cattle. I've got added some chickens, eggs, and vegetables, and beef. I mean, it all works for me, and it has turned out to be a blessing.
And when you do all of this hard work in planting, when the harvest comes, you give it away.
Because there's a whole lot of other stuff that goes into the business of trying to produce, package, get approval, and then get it into the market for people. I freely given to me, and I like to do what I do. My grandfather and my grandmother always took me to South Carolina during the summer. I always worked in the gardens. I always passed around with the chickens. I enjoyed the country cooking. And so I said, you know what, this is what I would like to do. And so when I got into that, I found out it's a whole lot more work than what I was enjoying during the summer. But I found out I like giving. I don't mind giving it away. I just like it to be received with a thankful heart. Some people don't receive with thankful hearts, but I still like giving it away because I know it is something that God has blessed me to be able to do. I have the land. I can do it. And I don't mind doing it. I love to say, deal with the garden and put something in there and then wait and see it come up. Now the hard work comes, you got to get it out of there. And sometimes, like this year, I had more beans than I could shake a stick at. And, but it produced, and I appreciated God for that. And I don't mind giving it to the saints. I don't mind giving it to people who want it. I tell people, come, and they can do it, as long as those people will respect the land. And remember, you're not the only one, and others, so it
and
has appreciate it. And this is about time. I was working in the garden yesterday, getting ready to put my greens in, because I got to have the collard greens, mustard greens, turnip greens, kale, so these are the things that I enjoy.
So as you look back over your life and you're now here in rural Rockingham County, what is it that you love about rural farm life?
One is peaceful. It's a sense of knowing that, when they talk about all of these rough times, when I leave the church and come home, it's dark or it's quiet. And as I tell them so often, I can come outside and stand in the middle of the yard and scream and holler, and I'm not bothering anybody. But I appreciate the serenity of the environment, and that's what counts for me in Rockingham County.
Serenity in Rockingham County.
Rockingham County.
You heard it best from Dr. Herman G. Platt of Reedsville, the farmer, the preacher, the minister, the philanthropist. You've got grit. I bet you know a Rockingham County citizen who you describe by saying, you've got grit. Email us a paragraph describing a Rockingham County citizen you think Spectrum 1304 should interview for You've Got Grit. Email your paragraph to mscott@co.rockingham.nc.us. That's mscott@co.rockingham.nc.us. You've got grit.